Hey guys. Okay, so last week David addressed a really important topic called conflict, something that none of us have the opportunity to totally avoid, right? And his address of conflict was about how we as Christians are supposed to handle conflict and deal with it. And he gave us a fun little acronym I kind of want to go back over. This is continuation of the series of essentially how we communicate and how we listen and have relationships with people. And conflict, unfortunately, is unavoidable. So this acronym that he gave us was called KNOCK. Okay, it was kind of for knock them out or knock it out for the conflict. The first letter was K, of course, K-N-O-C-K, so was kindness. Kindness being if you're going to have a conflict with someone, or if you're going to introduce conflict, you do it in a way that's kind. Secondly, we have a responsibility to notice whether or not someone is in fight or flight mode. Okay, it's to notice this when we initiate the conflict, because when we initiate a conflict, it's going to elicit a response in people. And then once we recognize whether they're in fight or flight mode, we have the responsibility to own that. That's where the O comes from, to make that safe. And the C was for contrast. And this was the part I think is kind of hard, because most of the time if they're in fight or flight, so we're going to own that responsibility. And then we've got a contrast, which is to apologize and ask them to help you understand. And then the last letter was K, which is keep at it. Because ultimately, this is going to be something that we always deal with, that we always have in our lives. And it's our responsibility to approach them with kindness, to notice, to own the responsibility to make it safe, and then to contrast, to make it into a conversation as opposed to a fight. So, a few little words by a man named Zig Ziglar. I don't know if anybody ever heard of him. Probably so. Motivational speaker, published author, that kind of deal. He says, you never know when a few sincere words can have an impact on a life. How important it is that we choose the right words. So today, we're going to be talking about a different subject, which is positive communication. And those of you tempted to laugh because I'm the person delivering positive communication, don't. I get it. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to communicate positively. And sincere words, the words that we speak to people, directed at people, carry with them sincerity, and it is our responsibility to choose positive words over negative words. So the big part of the reason why I wanted to mention David's lesson is not only to recap from what you learned last week, but because I think that a lot of times the conflict that arises in our lives is because we don't communicate positively, right? I'm guilty of it as bad as anybody is. But then again, when we look at it, negativity permeates our lives, doesn't it? To illustrate, a teacher comes into a classroom and she starts writing these math facts on the board. Okay, she writes 9 times 1 is 7, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but you guys can see them up there. Okay, she writes these. Well, what does the class do? They're going to laugh at her, right? Math teachers out there. The entire class laughs at her because 9 times 1 is not equal to 7, guys. Everybody here knows that, right? Well, the deal is the entire class laughs at her, and they're kind of laughing, and she just sits there and she waits until the laughter dies down, and she says, guys, the reason I did this, the reason I wrote this on this board is to demonstrate something to you all, something about how the world is going to treat you when you make a mistake. Because you all were caught up in that one little mistake that I made, and nobody seemed to want to catch themselves and stop and say, look at the 9 other things that I got right. Nobody praised me for those. And that really is true in our lives, isn't it? With where we work, I'm sure that some of you out there have, maybe all of you have had or currently have a boss or supervisor that really all they do is criticize, right? They offer nothing but ways that you could improve your performance as opposed to sharing with you all the 9 other things that you do correctly. So with all that in mind, okay, so if that is the world that we live in, we're going to take a step back, okay? So we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at this and try to get a better understanding of how we as humans, how we process things, and we are going to work on how we communicate positively. Because to most of us, criticism is going to resonate at least 3 times louder than positive things do, than praise. And if that's the case, okay, 3 times louder. So why is positive communication important? If negativity is out there and it abounds, why is positive communication so important? Has anybody here ever seen the movie Pretty Woman with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts? Raise your hand. A lot of people have seen that. Okay, so just to recap, to point out why positive communication is so important is that for those of you that haven't seen it, the general plot kind of centers around Richard Gere, who's this wealthy businessman, and he hires a woman, a prostitute that's kind of down on her luck, played by Julia Roberts, to essentially be his pretend girlfriend at these business events and things that are going on. And during that time, as time kind of goes on slowly, he cleans her up, he puts her in nice clothes, she attends these things with him. He starts to see her in a different light. At first, he didn't have much respect for her, and as he starts to see her differently, that's projected onto her. And over time, she starts to see that in herself and starts to actually become the way he sees her. And the reason that I bring this movie up is because it's a Hollywood depiction of what we call the Pygmalion or Rosenthal effect. Okay? This is a phenomenon where our expectations of a person affect that person's performance. If we have the expectation that they will do well, they will do better. And conversely, if we have the expectation of people that they will do poorly, they will as well. So, Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And this scripture is under a little subsection in chapter 4 titled Instructions for Christian Living. So it stands to reason that the author of Ephesians, Paul here, had to do a little work with this church in Ephesus because of the way they communicated. So apparently they struggled with positive communication as well. So what I'm going to do is I want to ignore that first part so that we could focus on that latter part. But only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. Because you see, even Paul knew, 2,000 years roughly before, psychologists even studied and understand and knew and gave this Pygmalion or Rosenthal effect a name, Paul knew that it was important to build others up. And he realized that tearing down others was never going to advance this early Christian movement, this thing that was going to change people's lives. And he understood not only was it not going to advance the movement, but that tearing people down is not a part of the lives of those who wear this label. That being a Christian demands us to be better. And as we can see from this verse, Christians have been struggling with it for a long time. Historically, the church has done a great job of pushing people away with criticisms, right? That's why a lot of people run away and then come back. Criticism rings out 3 times louder than praise does. We have this innate tendency to want to show people how they're living wrong and tell them about how they can do things right, don't we? Everybody agree with that? And it's not just as Christians, but just generally, people want to tell people how they're doing things wrong and what they could do better. If you notice, Paul tells them to build others up. Criticism and negativity are a great way to tear people down and make enemies. However, positivity builds people up. It brings out the best in people. One of the best things about positivity is that it's inviting, right? Everybody wants to be around somebody who's positive all the time. Negative people are difficult to be around, correct? Has anybody ever heard the phrase, you'll catch more flies with honey than with vinegar? It's the same kind of deal. People want to be around people that are positive. And so most of the time when I communicate in a hostile, critical, or demeaning way, it doesn't elicit the response I'm hoping for, does it? It usually causes conflict. So when I consistently tell someone how poorly they're doing, they're going to eventually believe it too. And that's going to push them away because it hurts. So what this chapter in Ephesians illustrates is that being a Christian demands something of us. This chapter demands that in a world where negativity dwells, we are to be a beacon of blessings in this world of curses. You know, it's easy to say that we need to communicate better, right? It's easy to say that we just need to communicate the positives. But genuinely doing that's the hard part. And with that, the biggest problem with changing that kind of communication style is that most of the time it comes from who we are. It comes from our core, right? With that, I want to cover a couple of things that I'm going to call truths, and you guys can see if you agree with me on those. Do you guys generally agree that, generally speaking, most of us are not out to hurt people, right? That's rarely our intentions when we're offering some advice or criticism. We're not trying to hurt people. Secondly, most of us care about ourselves as well, right? We care about our mental state, how we feel. We care about those things, and they're important to us. And so what happens when these two truths don't exactly line up? Well, to illustrate here, Wednesday night we're on our way to church, and I hear Grady yell out from the back seat, "Man, no, you stop acting so weird." Okay, kids are great. But to reiterate, Grady doesn't walk around trying to hurt his sister's feelings most of the time, or try to hurt her with the things that he says most of the time. Is that even as kids, they're not seeking to hurt other kids most of the time, but he used words that were vague and insulting, which is trying to get his point across. Really, he just wanted her to stop. And so I paused for a moment. I said, "Grady, hey, real quick, specifically, what is acting weird?" Well, she's waving her arms and making silly faces at me. Okay, man, that's just awful, just terrible. Okay, so I paused again and I said, "Grady, man, don't you think it would have been a little bit better to just say, 'Hey, Max, can you stop waving your arms and making faces at me?'" Would have communicated a lot better. And his reply was, "Yeah, I guess." Pretty standard there. But the point being is that basically the way we communicate things is not necessarily with the intent to hurt, but to help and change, but ourselves get in the way, because what we want to happen, what we want to change, is that person, to make them better, right? And so that got me to thinking about something. Thought, man, I understand it's been a long day. He's been at school all day. He, had gotten up really early that morning. And with that, he was probably really tired by the time we were coming to church, right? So that kind of led me to the next point to say, a lot of times our current mood changes the way we communicate with people, right? Our current mood makes us, I guess, subject to speaking poorly. And so if I'm tired, hungry, or stressed, I'm more likely to communicate negatively. And does anybody here ever notice how a mood can perpetuate itself? Anybody ever, when you get grumpy, you have a tendency to want to stay grumpy, right? Well, the problem with that is that we have to take note of that, those times when we're grumpy or we're, whatever it is that's got us in a bad mood, and we have to take responsibility to change that. And so don't worry, fortunately, there is an antidote to that, because how we communicate and what we do with our body can actually affect our mood. So has anybody ever heard the term fake it till you make it? That's pretty commonly. Well, it doesn't just apply to your job, it actually does apply to your person as well in your mood, because the physical act of smiling actually will boost serotonin and dopamine, which are two neurotransmitters in your brain that essentially deal with how well you feel, whether you feel, pleased and happy, basically. So the physical act of smiling actually modifies your brain chemistry. That's pretty important, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty neat, pretty little, just forcing yourself to smile. And over time, with enough practice, it actually makes smiling and speaking positively easier the more we do it, no matter what mood we're in. So the deal is that we recognize that we're in that bad mood, and then we do some things to change it. We go through the motions. We fake it until it becomes real. So I want to look at Philippians 4:8. We get that? We're going to, this will be the, we're going through now. Sorry, no big deal. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And Aaron did a great job this morning of bringing that into our time with communion and how important it is. But I want you to take just a minute and just really kind of think about that. Whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. Think about such things. Here we have Paul, once again, writing to a first century church about getting their mind right, because Paul understands that you've got to have your mind and your heart right to get better actions out of it. So I want to take a minute and let's focus on this praiseworthy thing. I think this is the part about positive communication that we get here, is that we define some things that are praiseworthy. What are those things? Would you guys agree that home runs are praiseworthy? We tend to give people high fives. They get a big cheer from the dugout, right? What about touchdowns? High scores, straight A's, closing deals, highest producers, banner months, quarters, year ends. Those things are praiseworthy, right? I agree with you. I mean, we give all kinds of accolades to those kind of people, the people that are able to do this. The deal is, though, these things are pretty rare, right? These things don't happen that often. Every time a batter gets up, he doesn't hit a home run. No, or he or she. It doesn't happen every time. Nobody throws a touchdown every time they pass the ball. Nobody, anytime they catch the ball, whatever it is, and you can go on and on down the list. Teachers, how many kids have straight A's out there? Not many, right? It's just a handful. So the deal is that these things are rare. So I want to posit a question to you. What if we stopped looking at these feats and accomplishments as things that are the only things that we praise? What if we stopped doing that and we started focusing on things of character? What if we praised people for their character? Things such as kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, fortitude, honesty, fairness, and resolve. And if you look closely enough, guys, you'll realize these things are everywhere around us. Are they uncommon? No, we see them, at least some of them, in probably every person that we come across. And I don't know about you guys, but personally, if I'm going to be praised for something, I would probably rather be praised for something like this than just an accomplishment, right? Because this speaks to who I am at my core, not just solely something I've managed to pull off in a feat or an accomplishment. And as Christians, I believe it is our responsibility to not only just focus on these things, but to take the time to notice them and praise and acknowledge and admonish these people at all times. Now, they're not going to grab the headlines in the newspaper, but I do think that they mean a lot more to the people, or to people in general, when they hear them. So this morning, we've covered some different topics here and things about communication and why it's so important. So this morning, we're going to cover, I want to take a step here to what's our takeaway from this? This is all neat information and good and everything. So what's the takeaway this morning? How exactly do we build others up, change our core, and dwell on the good? Well, okay, so the takeaway here is for building others up. What I want you to take away this morning is that first and foremost, we assume the best of people. Assume the best of, can you guys, you guys see that? It's kind of small. It's assume the best of people. Think about your kids. Don't we have a tendency to desire the absolute best for our kids? You want to be an astronaut? good, let's go do it. Even though statistically speaking, that's probably unfathomable for most kids. We don't care though. We hope that that's real, right? Secondly, we have to expect that they're going to succeed. We have to believe that others are truly capable of doing things that are far greater than our expectations. If we can't look at each person and think, you are so good and you are going to succeed, then how can they actually get there if we don't expect that? Third here, just because I kind of coined this term, I guess, I don't know, become a beacon of blessings in a world full of curses, is that we take the time to focus on saying good things to and about people. Because it's not our job to criticize, offer judgment, or say things that push people away. That's not in the itinerary of a Christian's daily life. Our responsibility is to bless them. So how do we change our core? Okay. This goes back to that whole mood thing. We got to take note of our bad mood triggers, right? We got to know that if I am tired, I am grumpy. If I am hungry, I'm grumpy. If we take note of these things, we take care of ourselves. We get enough sleep. We make sure that we can eat. If those things, we do our best to avoid those specific triggers that know are going to impact our mood. Because if we can't do that, the deal is we don't always recognize that, and that's tough. So the next deal is we recognize when those things happen or when we are tired or hungry, because they're not always avoidable. We have to recognize that we're not in a good mood, right? Because we can't take control, which is the third part, which is fake it until we make it, unless we recognize that we're in a bad mood. And so we remember that our actions can change our mood, and it's up to us to break the cycle when we do get into a bad mood. And thirdly, how do we dwell on the good? We have to stay mindful. That's big, broad, and vague, right? We have a tendency to fall back on long-held habits. That's a tough thing. I know we all do, because we are creatures of habit. We do that. We have a tendency to fall back on those, and it's our job to not just relax all the time and just go with the flow and do those things. That we have to make it a choice. We have to make the choice to prioritize our focus on the good in the lives of others. Secondly, here, we have to recognize character before accomplishments. Accomplishments are great, and we definitely want to praise people for those, but how often do you take the time to praise those people around you for the good that you're seeing in their lives, for those things of character that are actually quality, like kindness, goodness, honesty, fairness, those kinds of things? How often do we praise people for those? Hardly ever, right? To take the time to actually notice that and do it. And thirdly, we readily praise those around us. Do you guys remember me saying a little bit ago about how criticism resonates 3 times louder than praise does? So I was at a training deal a couple of weeks ago, and part of that on the third day was this mentor training, because I have to help mentor some colleagues that are going through this sales process deal and provide feedback and criticism. And one of the things they told us in this mentor training is that before you ever offer criticism, you praise them 3 times. You praise somebody 3 times before you offer a critique. Otherwise, if you don't do that, they will very quickly find themselves hating what they're doing. Is that to encourage someone, it takes 3 times the praise to make up for that one time criticizing. So we have to choose to acknowledge, commend, and praise those people around us at all times, so that we can become that beacon of blessing in a world full of curses. Because it's our responsibility, and with our relationships, with the people we work with the people that we care about with each other here, is that we praise before we criticize. And I think that it's God's hope that we can be that place that is inviting, that is a place of comfort, a place of respite from the world's critiques, from the world's criticisms. So if you will, let's pray this morning. God, we thank you so much for being being our God, for teaching us, for showing us, for giving us Jesus to show us how we live, God, to put others before ourselves, before our own feelings and our own nature, God, that we can choose to make the right decisions, to speak positively, to communicate in a way that is effective and building others up. God, that what your message is, it is a message of hope. It is a message of triumph, and it is a message of victory. And God, I pray that you will allow us to share that hope through the way we bless people, that you will allow us to communicate in a way that is inspiring, that makes others better around us, and that we become more like you. And it's in your Son's name. Amen.